I moved into the old Hastings house on the edge of town at the tail end of November, late when the trees were brittle gray skeletons and dusk swallowed the street in 40 seconds flat. The rent was suspiciously low, but my options were limited. It had been a rough year. I needed a roof. The house stood 3 stories tall, faded crimson, siding cracked in places, its peaked roof like a dropped fist. Inside, the air smelled of damp carpet and stale teakwood polish. The layout was odd: narrow halls, bumping corners, ceilings that pitched unpredictably. Essentially, it felt like being inside someone else's memory. I shrugged it off as character. My bedroom was at the front, second floor, with a window facing oak trees that reached toward the sky. The next room, about half the size, was labeled office on the lease. And then there was the third room, without a door, without a number, just a curtained opening at the hallway's end. Blank walls, no window. The landlord warned me not to use it. Said it wasn't wired for heat, and his cat went missing in there years ago. I didn't push. Some warnings you just don't want. On day 3, around dinner time, I felt my nose begin to itch. Not allergies. My sinuses were fine. It was dry out, but my apartment had a humidifier. I pinched my nose. No dryness. I shrugged it off. That evening, as I drifted to sleep, it started, an unmistakable trickle against my pillow. I woke, hands bloody and sticky, heart pounding. It had stopped when I sat up. I checked my shirt. Nothing. Just a bit of blood on the pillow. I chalked it up to a nosebleed from stress or dry air. I turned the humidifier higher, pinched the radiator's thermostat, wound the comforter tighter. It happened again 2 nights later. Same, asleep, slow trickle, waking in a pool of crimson. But this time, I knew the pattern. It started just as I closed my eyes, intensified after 10 minutes. And it was always in that room. Not the bedroom, not the kitchen, only behind that strip curtain archway. That oddly shaped third room. I'd wake, heart pounding, throat dry, after multiple nosebleeds. Roughly the same time after sleep began. I grabbed a pillow and slept elsewhere after that. Horrible, fat red spots splashed across the hardwood floor and rug. The smell, acrid and coppery, hit me like ammonia. The next day, I leased an old student-grade metal detector on impulse. Drove to the store, thinking I might unearth something. Wiring? Nails? Hidden fixtures? Maybe it was something in the walls. No hits. Nothing. I searched the public records. The house was built in 1924. In the 1950s, it was subdivided into apartments. In 1972, there was a tenant fatality, heart attack, says the local newspaper. Then mild renovations in the 90s. No reports of blood or anything odd. But the real mystery remained. Lack of heating. No ductwork in that third room. Walls cold as cathedral stone. I used a thermal camera, a friend's phone attachment. Guess what? The room registered 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. But also a weird pattern. At the center, just 3 inches above the floor, it had spikes of warmth like a phantom heater buried beneath. I left markers on the floor. Measured nightly. I measured everything: blood loss, time to bleed, body position, and documented all on a spreadsheet. So professional. Coming home late one night, I tried to avoid the hallway. But I heard scuffing light like shoes pacing low to the floor, echoing inside that curtained alcove. My breath caught. I stopped and stared at the cover. Familiar pattern. Floor temperature peaked again. A flush of warmth. My nose tingled instantly. I cursed, turned, and forced myself down the bedroom hallway, numb feet, pounding pulse. I've never feared a closet curtain so much. Inside that curtained room, there's only a dusty old wardrobe, tarnished brass handles, and pills of cobwebs. I opened it. Empty, just hangers and musty air. But when I closed the door, I got a nosebleed instantly. I staggered out, grabbing tissues. Blood soaked through at least two before I could flee. Later, I put a weatherproof thermal gauge, old school analog, by the pocket of the wardrobe. It spiked red right after the second bleed. On the hardwood floor under the wardrobe, I marked with a Sharpie a small circle, my own bullseye. That next night, I tested, slept in the kitchen. No bleed. Slept outside in a sleeping bag in the living room. No bleed. But once I accidentally turned so my cheek brushed that third room carpet, I woke in pain, fresh blood on neck. Not pillow. The pattern was undeniable. Something inside that room, beneath the wardrobe, was triggering it. Friday morning, I called a structural engineer. Without mentioning nosebleeds, I said, I think there's something odd in this floor. He came, took samples of wood, subfloor, insulation. When I stepped into the third room to show him, I felt movement, a soft vibration under my feet. He left half an hour later, umbrella tucked, driven by polite confusion and layered intrigue. Results would take weeks. That night, I couldn't sleep. My brain obsessed. Around midnight, I crept into the room, took my digital thermometer, walked slowly in circles. Warm streak 7 inches above the wood floor around the wardrobe. I scooped a handful of carpet fibers, took an old shirt inside, stepped in one corner. Got a nosebleed seconds later. Soaked shirt quadrant. That shirt now lives in a seal bag. I'm writing this from my brother's place. I couldn't stay in the house overnight. He's bringing my old bedroom air mattress down tomorrow, so I can sleep out in the living room. Maybe empty the wardrobe. Move the wardrobe. Break the floor up. Fling it outside if I must. But right now, all I feel is dread. Something's in there, and it's waiting, and tonight it might come for me. The next night, I slept on the living room air mattress. I couldn't bring myself to stay anywhere near that cursed room. Every creak of the floor made my heartbeat spike in my throat. By 3 a.m., I was drinking water and staring at the ceiling, counting sweat beads. Around 3:37 a.m. exactly. The time the nosebleeds started before, my brother texted, "Can you clean your car? There's a weird red stain on the back seat." I sank into the pillow. A red stain? Not my house. My car felt safe. Or at least it used to. He answered, "Door lock hit something. Stain looks like blood, small but deep crimson." Took photo. I stared at the blank ceiling. Suddenly, I smelled it, a whisper of copper like steel and old emotions. My nostrils flared, and then it began. Warm, thick, liquid. I bolted upright, blood slipping onto the pillowcase. I threw the bedding aside and rushed for tissues. The thought hit me in full. It followed me. Not just the house. Me. That morning, I went to his house and saw the photo. Dark red, a small but precise smear across black leather. The section matched exactly with the back seat cushion I'd sat in days ago. He said it almost glowed. He had to scrub twice before it lightened. I didn't sleep last night. That afternoon, after tossing his photo, I went back to the house, to that cursed room. I had to know how far this reached. I brought gloves and a mason jar for evidence. Stepping into the room, I felt that cold cloak around me. The wardrobe loomed. I propped open the curtain. There, under the dim hallway lamp, a tiny, dried red drop on the carpet. Like Tom had stopped mid-splat. I snapped a photo. The thermal camera faintly pulsed, its red-hot spot there, slightly warmer than usual. In the mason jar, I collected the drop, the moisture in the fibers. I labeled it fragment number 2. I felt insane, but also focused. Maybe if I find enough traces, I can locate the source. That afternoon, I posted on a local DIY conspiracy forum. Unexplained blood-like marks, nosebleeds tied to one room. Anyone? Replies were slow. One user said they had heard of sacred geometry in old houses causing psychosomatic bleeding. Another said it sounded like thin space bleeding, a spiritual leak via interdimensional stress. It helped, mostly because I'm not alone. That evening, the air grew heavy. I walked through the hallway. Curtain door. It called me. I stayed in the foyer, feet planted. I typed new notes in my phone. BBB, blood bleed behavior. HT, heat trace intensifies at 3:37 a.m. I left the foyer to walk the dog. Came back to that room, maybe 15 minutes later. There was another droplet, and this time a faint smear like a fingertip swiped along the wall 3 inches off the floor. A dark reddish stain across pale wallpaper. I rubbed at it. No smear. Just stuck in the porous texture. That night, I slept in the kitchen. I couldn't risk the living room either now. I laid on the linoleum just under a single LED bulb. Every 5 minutes, I hummed to keep myself conscious. Halfway through the night, I felt it, a presence. Not a whisper. More like a heartbeat through the wall. Low kick thump. 3 a.m. Again, I crawled toward the pantry, pressed my ear to the wall shared with the cursed room. The thumping stopped. A voice, low, ragged. My room. That was it. No more. No plea. No name. I recoiled, scrambled backward, knees banging. I packed every trace. Labeled each sample. By dawn, I'd arrested myself. Again, here's what I've compiled so far. 1. Bloodstains apartment car. House car again. 2. Heat anomalies always centered in that room at that height. 3. Voice imminently human, yet grotesquely simple. I'm isolating exposure. No driving. No alone moments. Tomorrow I'll invite the engineer back, this time with a geologist friend. We'll scan beneath the subfloor with ground-penetrating radar. If this is some criminal-level stain or unnatural piping, all right, I'll find it. If it's not, then I'm not dealing with a faucet. I'm dealing with something else, and I'm terrified. The day arrived, engineer, geologist, and I standing in that doomed room. We arrived just before dawn, tools in hand, ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging camera, moisture meter. I'd also brought blood fragments, the car smear, the carpet droplet, the fingertip stain, all sealed and documented. The GPR screen flickered, then revealed something beneath the subfloor. An irregular cavity running 2 feet deep, roughly the size of a child curled in fetal position, unaccounted for on any original blueprints. The engineer's eyes went pale. The geo scanned again. Temperature anomalies beneath the floor, warmer than surrounding earth, as if something living pulsed there. The thermal camera wept in disgust. Hotspots circled the floor in the same circular pattern I'd seen. As we probed the floor, the carpet trembled, like it knew we were poking. I tried to breathe, think rationally, but all I heard was my heart, and that primal need. I had to open that trap. We removed floorboards carefully. The engineer's drill word. The moment would cracked, perfect semicircle. A hiss escaped from below. Moisture dripped, steam rose from the exposed cavity. The smell, iron, freshly torn flesh, earth. I gagged. We peered into a 10-inch shaft. Just dirt at first. Then a slick patch, fresh, wet, feeding a root-like vein into my flashlight beam. A burrow. The geologist pointed. Not natural. Soil's been replaced in patchwork. Someone or something filled and sealed this intentionally. Then I felt it. Across my scalp, down my spine like a gloved hand brushing bare skin. The engineer snapped his head toward me, saw me pale and trembling. Then the drip, slow, bright red from the edge of the hole. I realized it knew we'd broken in. We retreated. I'd gathered more samples. That night, back at my friend's house, I slept fitfully. New pressure, new dread. Around 2:47 a.m., I woke to a soft slurp. My nose burned. I reached for tissues, empty box. I stumbled toward the kitchen. Every step echoed. Behind me, crawling, wet on the carpet, a bloody smear. I froze. It seemed to form letters as it moved. Stella. My sister's name. Alive, elegant, but dripping. My mind snapped back. I gasped and fled. Why was my sister's name here? Has it been her trail, too? I can't sleep. I'm too terrified to drive home. I moved samples to a climate-safe storage. I've changed the locks. Tomorrow, I return with a small excavation team. We'll dig beneath that room, unearth the cavity, and confront whatever lives there. I don't know what I'll find. Horrific remains? Something alive? Blood welling upward? I don't care. I need answers. If this ends my life, so be it. But I won't bleed alone in the dark. We returned at dawn under a leaden sky, the air tasting of steel and rain. Our team, civil engineer David, archaeologist Lena, 2 laborers stood in silence, each shuffling tools with trepidation. Morning mist curled around the house's eaves, as though quietly watching. We cut through the floorboards again, slow as dissection. Layer by layer, carpet, plywood, paper, each giving way with sickening reverberation. Then the soil, dark, drenched, smelling of coagulating blood. One shovel ripped a clump and slumped into crimson sludge. A laborer pulled out a rusted mesh, arch-shaped like ribs. Interspersed, a plastic toy skeleton, warped by pressure and time, embedded in earth and metal. I didn't move. My stomach knotted. The deeper we dug, the more labyrinthine the soil. Bones melded with wires. Rust etched into humerus, hafted into femurs. Like the boy was caged and nurtured underground. Lena wiped dust from the skull, tiny, fragile. A boy, maybe 5 years old. Male, lived maybe 50 years ago. Then we saw them, root-like veins, red-black filaments radiating outward in perfect geometry. They crawled under pipes, into walls beneath subfloor. The engineer used a thermal probe. The heat rose in arcs identical to those veins. The boy's cage was the epicenter. That was no accident. By the time Lena retrieved the skull, I felt like I'd swallow knives. She spoke softly, reverently, breath stalled. Colby Hastings, an echo of a name I'd whispered in nightmares. I'm sorry, I muttered, backing away, every fiber of my being recoiling from the earth stain. I slipped a fragment of rib bone into a foil bag, tightly sealed. That evening, back in the house, something shifted. Ceilings groaned. Floorboards sang. At 2:30 a.m., the front door rattled like epileptic laughter in wood. All lights flickered. I pressed myself against a wall in the kitchen, knees shaking. A voice, guttural calm. "You took him." It wrapped around the house, bound into the boards. Each syllable rattled glass. My phone vibrated with static. The bone fragment throbbed hot in my pocket. I couldn't stay there. I fled to a friend's lakeside cabin far from town. Trembling, I placed the bone and rusted cage in a tin box, locking it in her guest room closet. Tried to sleep, but the cabin throbbed with the same ragged heartbeat. The air pulsed in my chest. A soft creak, like someone scraping the wood panel beside my bed. At dawn, I collapsed near the lake shore, sobbing into frigid water. My reflection fractured. Blood dripped from my nose despite being nowhere near the haunted room. The vein network, I realized, extended through me. I returned to the house with supplies. Iron filings, chalk, sage, consecrated salt. Each item promised protection, but only if arranged precisely. The known ritual. Mirror the subfloor's branching veins in chalk. Circle the cage and bone fragment. Burn sage clockwise. Sprinkle filings along each line. I worked in daylight. By dusk, unswept chalk dust formed red, geometric cracks across boards. I felt eyes on me, the house waiting for dusk for darkness. By nightfall, instruments in place. Bone on a cloth, cage in the chalk circle, filings tracing the veins. At midnight, I lit the sage. Smoke curled upward in spirals. The air grew cold. The chalk lines glowed faintly red. Then the ceiling groaned. The walls pulsed like a living thing. A low chant, unintelligible, thrummed in the stone and wood. My hand shook, but I pressed on. Each loop of sage, each grain of iron, each pinch of salt. At 2:37 a.m., the time the nosebleeds began, the chalk cracked. A fissure spread across the floorboard like a vein. From within, a gout of air erupted, flinging the sage and bone fragment aside. A roar followed, like 1,000 whispered names. My ears rang. My eyes watered. And then silence. When I looked up, dawn's orange light fell over the room. Everything lay pristine. No bone. No cage. No chalk. No sage. No iron filings. Only a whisper. "Thank you." I crumpled beside the vanished lines. The morning after the ritual, I woke in the living room, wrapped in a blanket on the couch. My head pounded, and every surface in the room was covered in dust, fine chalk residue drifting like ash. The faint scent of sage lingered in stale air. There was no sign of bone, cage, or chalk lines. I brushed my fingers over the hardwood. It felt normal, not warm, not pulsing, not breathing. I thought I'd succeeded, but my nose immediately began to bleed, fresh, rich, thick. It splattered across the coffee table. Not expected. I sank to the floor, feeling my pulse echo through my skull. I held a towel to my face, shaking as the bleeding slowed. I looked up at the ceiling. Something moved, a dark stain blooming over plaster, creeping across the ceiling like mold, subtle, wet growing. A whisper rattled in my skull. "I am okay." By midday, the ceiling stain had grown noticeably. I traced its audible itching sound with my fingertips. It felt fuzzy, as though millions of hairs rustling near my nose. The crickets and cars outside fell silent. Then a single knock, soft on the ceiling. Then another. 3 times. "Thank you," it whispered. My phone buzzed. A message on my screen. Not finished. No sender. No context. The floorboards beneath me chipped like plaster dust. I sank to the ground, heart racing as if the house itself became liquid. I grabbed my jar of blood samples and lined them up under the ceiling stain. I spoke aloud, voice trembling. "Is this enough?" I squeezed each vial. The blood bubbled upward, dripping condensation onto the hardwood. Each drop splashed. The dust muster motion. Then the stain above contracted, like lungs exhaling. An image rippled across, a faint red constellation like a star chart, expanding and shrinking in rhythm with my pulse. It spelled something momentarily. Yield. My chest tightened. By nightfall, I'd frozen the spot with an air conditioner and avoided the living room entirely. But I needed rest. I slept in a sleeping bag in the basement, old tool bench, the smell of sawdust. No nosebleed. Quiet all night. I even dozed between 2, 3 a.m. At 2:47 a.m., I woke screaming, not from my mind, but from my throat. Something pressed its palm over my mouth from behind. The air smelled of iron and dirt, damp and rotten. My scream became a gargle. A child's voice echoed in every box, in every plank of wood. I didn't ask for this. I fled upstairs, tearing upstairs into the entryway. Every surface painted with chalk dust again. The lines drawn everywhere, onto dining table, wall, mirror. A message circled. You broke the promise. Today the house is shifting. Windows are jammed. Doors open by themselves. Temperature drops to bone chill at odd hours. Each time I step inside, my nose tingles. Chest tightens. I've sealed the cabin. The fragments are back in my car, sealed inside a cooler. I know I can't stay here, but I need to, because tonight I have to finish it. The constellation under the ceiling must be erased, reversed, reclaimed, or I'll never escape. The decision was made at 3:12 a.m. I couldn't run anymore. The house would always follow. The bleeding, the voices, the hallucinations, it had all been pointing to a single fact. I had activated something ancient, and now it lived inside the house. Or inside me. Or both. When I walked back into the house that final time, the air was syrup thick. Sound had weight. Every floorboard creaked, not beneath me, but beside me, like something else walked in parallel. I didn't pack anything, just a flashlight, a notebook, the samples, and my resolve, because I had finally accepted this was not a haunting, it was a pact, and I had broken it. The living room was pitch dark, but the stain on the ceiling had returned, larger now. It stretched from wall to wall. It shimmered faintly, like oil on water, and moved, pulsing slowly, in sync with my own breathing. Or maybe its own. I stood beneath it. My flashlight flickered. Then it clicked off completely. The room went dark. I heard a voice from above, not loud, not angry, just weeping. A wet, gurgling weep. Finish the stars, it said. I opened my notebook and flipped to the last page. The sketches I'd made over the weeks, the stains, the drip patterns, the positions I bled from, formed a map. An accidental one. A diagram of movement and intent. I lay on the hardwood floor and stared upward. There were patterns in the house, mirrored by the markings on my body. My blood had been marking a path all along. The boards began to give beneath me, not breaking, not cracking, but sinking slowly like the wood had become flesh. I tried to sit up, but my back adhered to the floor like warm tar. I couldn't move. I stared upward, trembling, as the ceiling melted into a fog of stars. And I realized those weren't stars. They were eyes. Dozens. Hundreds. All blinking in unison. My breath caught in my throat. Blood gushed from my nose. It didn't run down my face. It floated upward, toward the ceiling, forming arcs like veins across the glowing constellation of eyes. Each drop that reached the ceiling opened another eye. Each blink whispered my name. I screamed. From the left wall, behind the old brick fireplace, I heard a click. A metal latch? The bricks parted, not violently, but like a slow exhale. From within the cavity, a man stepped out. At least, he used to be a man. He wore the same shirt I did when I moved in. His face was cracked like porcelain, and in place of eyes, nothing. Just smooth skin stretched tight and wet, twitching slightly. He held a key, the same key I found in the shed on my first night. He dropped it onto the floor in front of me and whispered, "You let it out." Then he turned and walked backward into the cavity. The bricks closed again, seamless, like he was never there. I awoke on the ceiling. I don't know how to explain that sentence, but I was there on the ceiling, staring down at my own body on the floor. I was covered in blood. I was unmoving, and the eyes on the ceiling no longer looked at me. They were looking down at the thing that used to be me, because I was no longer the host. The house had finished its cycle, and it had birthed something new. I don't live in that house anymore. Not really. Someone else does. Someone with my face, my name, my habits. But if you go there, if you stand in the living room and look straight up, you'll see something strange in the ceiling. A water stain, maybe, or a shadow. It shifts when you breathe. It follows your movements. And if you stay long enough, just long enough to feel your ears begin to ring and your throat go dry, you'll bleed. Only a little at first, just enough to map the stars again, because the house is hungry, and the constellation needs correcting.